Hi everyone, this is our day 2 of the Pollinator Learning Summer course. In our second part, we're going to talk about the importance and the diversity of bee species. Next slide, please. So last time, in our last video, we talked about how bees are the different types of pollinators and bees, and but what we didn't talk about is how important bees are. And one of the reasons bees are so important is because they're considered a keystone species, which means that they play a much bigger role in the ecosystem compared to other species. So you might see here in the picture that the middle stone is called a keystone, and what the keystone does is it supports the rest of the arch and makes sure the entire bridge stays stable. So next slide, please. So as you can see in this video, when she removes the keystone, the rest of the bridge topples down, and this would be similar to how the rest of the ecosystem would react if bees were pulled out of an ecosystem. Next slide, please.
Okay, so on the right of the screen, we can see a food web, and if you're not familiar with that right now, I'll just briefly go over it. So in the middle, you have a bee, and the wasp can eat the bee, and the skunk can eat the wasp, and the owl can eat the skunk. So that's just an example of how it works, kind of. And because the bee like in the middle of the food web, you can tell that everything else depends on it. So that if you took the bee out, then everything else would just collapse, like Kanan was saying earlier. So what this food web is like a pretty good representation, but what it's missing out is that it's missing out on the importance of bees pollination. So bees account for the pollination of a lot of flowers and fruits and a lot of food that animals eat. So if you took away the bee, you would also be taking away the plants that bees pollinate. So every animal that like eats the food, that eats the tomato, that eats the berries, like those animals will all be removed from the ecosystem as well. So this slide is just kind of saying the importance of why, just kind of reinforcing the idea that bees are really necessary for the ecosystem's like survival and for the ecosystem's health. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, you see this huge statistics that the work pollinators do to grow crops around the world is valued at over $125 billion. So what that kind of means is that all the crops that pollinators are able to produce, like for example, if one pollinator was able to pollinate and allow for the growth of 10 tomatoes, if you sold those tomatoes, that would be this number underneath. So this kind of shows that every pollinator in the world, like it contributes this much money if you sold all the fruits, all the flowers that it was able to pollinate. So to put that into a little bit of perspective, that's 69,400,000 trips to Disney World, or that's also 417 million Nintendo Switches. Next slide, please.
So I want you all to take a second to take a guess. So do you guys think honeybees are native to the US? You can pause and think about it if you want, but we'll just move on in the meanwhile. Next slide, please. So if you guessed no, that would actually be correct because honeybees are actually native to Europe. So they're kind of like immigrants. Next slide, please. So I want you guys to take another guess. How many species of bees make honey? And you can pause and think about this one too. Next slide, please. So the answer is there's only one bee species that produces honey, and it's the honeybee. Next slide, please.
So I'll start the game. Okay, so keystone species are species that take up an important role in the ecosystem, like the one keystone we saw in the bridge in the slide that Chandu presented. Okay, so honeybees are not native to the US, they are native to the European region. So it's true that pollinators help make that much all over the year. They have a very big impact on our economy. These are images of bees one of our members, Tammy, took. So I think Tammy can explain about these bees and whether they are bees or not.
Yeah, so I'll explain the next few. So that was not a bee, that was actually a wasp that I found on the internet. So this is kind of confusing, but that actually was a bee. And I threw this bee in to trick you guys because this is actually a wasp mimic bee. So that's why it looks so much like the wasp that was in the previous question. So yeah, this is a bee and it's called the Carpenter bee. And they're these really big, fuzzy bees, black bees that kind of roam around California. So if you see like a really, really big bee, fuzzy bee, then it's probably the Carpenter bee. And they're actually, I think, one of the biggest bees in California. So yeah, this is a bumblebee that I took a picture of around a month ago while I was on a walk. So you'll probably be able to find them everywhere since they're pretty common. They're very cute little fuzzy bees. So yeah, this is a male sweat bee that we took a picture of a few years ago when we were touring the honeybee gardens at UC Davis. And actually, if you'll notice, this bee is kind of in between the fingers of the professor that we visited. And that's because sweat bees, like their name implies, are attracted to human sweat. So hopefully you guys thought long.
Okay, so from Tammy and Vishali's Kahoot, we saw all the different kinds of native bees, like the carpenter bee, the bumble bee, the sweat bee. So what exactly are native bees? They're bees that came from the area that they live in. So kind of like Native Americans. Native Americans come from America. They've been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of generations. So similar to that is native bees. So there are over 4,000 species of native bees in North America. and 1,600 of those are actually native to California. So you can see in the bottom corner, you can see 2 native bee species of the Carpenter bee and the Bumble Bee. Okay, so here are some traits that most native bees have in common. So most of them are solitary. That means that they live by themselves, so they don't have hives or honey. There's one major exception that we're going to see in the next slide, but yeah, mostly they don't really have anything to guard because they're not living with other bees and they don't have honey to guard, so they won't really sting you. Pretty harmless. They're either ground nesting or wood nesting, meaning that they either live in holes they make in the ground or they live in holes they make in wood. So they also have coevolution with native plants. So if you guys remember from the previous video of day 1, we had the comic with the giraffe and the tree got taller, so the giraffe got taller to catch up to it, and the tree got taller again to avoid the giraffe, and the giraffe got even taller to catch up to the tree. So if you guys remember that, that was coevolution. So native bees co-evolved with native plants. Basically, these native plants got so good at getting native bees to come to the flowers and pollinate. So these native bees are actually better at pollinating certain native plants than honeybees, and they can even pollinate plants that honeybees can't, like tomatoes. And one way they can do this is buzz pollination, which honeybees can't do. So in the next slide, in the next couple of slides, we're gonna see how buzz pollination works. So bumblebees, these are the exception to native bees being solitary that we talked about. So they nest underground, so they're ground nesting bees, and they have hives, but they're much, much smaller than honeybees. So usually less than a couple hundred bees. They collect and eat nectar and pollen like any bee, really. And they also use buzz pollination, which is like their special trait. Bumblebees use buzz pollination. So in this next slide, we're going to see how buzz pollination works. So some flowers only release pollen in response to a vibration of a specific frequency. So as the bumblebee is going along, it's making like a certain kind of buzz, like buzz, but the flowers are only going to respond to a vibration of a certain frequency that the bumblebee can make that's different from the flying frequency. So we're going to see that in the video.
Okay, so now we're gonna go into another species of bees called Carpenter bees. And these bees are solitary, which means that they live alone, and they like to nest in wood, and they like to burrow in unfurnished wood, which is why sometimes if you've got wait, Chandu, what?
Oh, so for the video, so the reason why we skipped over like the first minute is because the lady says
I
that
thought you said
pollination
something
is.
I said was inappropriate, and I was like, oh, we can't have that in.
No,
okay.
no. Sorry.
Okay,
I
okay,
just
okay.
like.
That's okay. Okay.
Okay, just start over.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Serena, what? Serena, you're breaking up a lot.
Texting at all.
Is she saying something?
Oh, mention the texting.
Can you guys hear her?
Not really.
Serena, what did you just say?
I'll mute everyone else.
Yeah.
You're talking now.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, just
okay.
say your thing now.
Texting, like whatever, it doesn't matter. Skipped over a minute. Also, I told you if you just.
I have no idea what the fuck she said. Type it in. Okay, go back. I don't care. Okay, ready? Okay, so the next type of bees that we're going to talk about is carpenter bees. And these bees are solitary, which means that they like to live independently or on their own. And might guess from their name, carpenter, that they are related to wood. And what they like to do is kind of burrow themselves into unfurnished wood, which is why if you're sometimes building a house, or if you've got unfurnished wood, if you have some kind of furniture from unfurnished wood, you might notice these bees have burrowed themselves into that wood, and that's kind of their habitat. So these bees, therefore, they help to decompose rotten wood, and they feed on nectar and pollen, which the females will also use to line their nests. Next slide, please. So the next species of bees I want to talk about are Kakou bees. So these bees are also solitary, just like the carpenter bees, and they also they like to burrow into the ground. They like to burrow in ground, and one thing about them is that they're not very good at collecting pollen, so they kind of cheat their way, where they will get the nectar from the plant, but because they're not very hairy, or they don't have hair on their body, they won't collect pollen and help plants help plants reproduce and perform pollination. And these types of bees are also parasites, which means that they lay their eggs in other bees' nests, and therefore they're not very good pollinators either, and they're also parasites. Next slide, please.
All right, now on to the longhorn bees. As the name suggests, longhorn bees have very long horns, and they are one of the very interesting species of bees. They are solitary, which means they won't harm you, and they nest underground. And they're very important for sunflowers and daisies. That longhorn really allows them to go and pollinate really well. Next slide, please. Another type of bee is a leafcutter bee, and as the name suggests, leafcutter bees have like a part around their mouth to cut out circular shapes from leaves, and they live in rotten wood and use sections of leaves to line up their nests, and they're very important for alfalfa, which is cow feed. Next slide.
Okay, so now I'll be talking about sweat bees, which is our last type of native bee that we'll be talking about. So sweat bees, as Tammy mentioned before, are called sweat bees because they're attracted to sweat, like human sweat. So they're attracted to like the moisture and like the salt. So that's why sometimes if you're outside and you're sweating and it might like land on you and might like lick you, but probably won't sting you unless you like annoy it. So the thing about sweat bees is that they're metallic. They're kind of metallic and shiny, kind of like a fly's eyes are, and they can be green or yellow or any other type of color like that. They are also nocturnal or active during the night, and they're the only type of bees that are. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll be going over a review of what we learned because it was a lot. So bees are keystone species, which means that they're very important to our ecosystem. And without it, the ecosystem will likely like collapse or not be very healthy. These are also very important to our economy because of all the food that pollination is able to contribute. And there are many species of native bees that are solitary, which means that they live alone. And some native bees have some special traits like buzz pollination that allow them to pollinate native plants better. So honeybees can pollinate a greater variety of plants, so that's why they're important, and that's why they're able to kind of like succeed in our ecosystem. But we do need native bees to pollinate specific crops and native plants that can't go without native bee pollination, like the tomato plant. Next slide, please.
All right, so If you guys want to learn more about bees and pollinators and also what you can do specifically to help, you can check out our website, www.hnbeyond.org. However, if you're viewing this video recording, you probably already are on our website, or if you're not, just simply go to that link. And if you go to our website, there's a fun game on bee facts and bee myths you can check out. It's kind of like two truths and a lie. There's more information on the different types of native bees found in California, and there are fun environmental related events that you might want to attend, like festivals, etc., where you can do hands-on work to help the bees and other pollinators. Next slide, please. So on our website, we even have more resources for what you can do specifically to help the bees. And there are specific plants you can plant that will help enrich your garden and help allow native bees to pollinate these native plants, and overall will help your garden and the environment. And we have plant suggestions and craft ideas in our quarantine bee brochure. You can access it with that bit.ly link there. And all of these activities can be done at home. You don't have to leave the house or anything, and they're very easy to do. You can also check out other websites and other organizations other than our organization, helpbee.org, xerxes.org, and calscape.org. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you so much for listening to our Day 2 Pollinator Learning Summer Course recording. Thank you so much if you watched it all the way to the end. We really enjoyed presenting, and we hope you enjoyed learning as much as we enjoyed writing this presentation. We would really appreciate it if you could fill out this form. This form will allow us to make future presentations. It will allow us to add new content to it. And also, if you have any questions about anything we taught about in this presentation, or even about anything in general about pollinators or bees, you can ask them. You can ask those questions in the form, and we will try our best to get back to you in an email and respond to you with the answer. So you can scan the QR code to access the form, or you can go to that link over there. Okay, next slide, please. All right, that's it. Thank you so much, and we hope you guys have a good day.